The champagne flute was still in my granddaughter's hand when she said it, and the whole tent went so quiet I could hear the caterers stop moving behind me. "I want to thank the people who actually raised me," she said into the microphone, and she looked right past me, right over my head, to the couple sitting at table 3. My real family, the Pembertons. Because blood doesn't make a family. Love does. And some people only ever showed up with a checkbook. 140 people turned to look at me. I felt every one of those looks land like little stones. My wife had been gone 11 years by then, and I remember thinking she would have known what to do with her face, how to hold it. I just sat there. My hand was flat on the white tablecloth, and I noticed it wasn't shaking, and that surprised me because everything inside me had gone to ice. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer, the last 12 running my own firm out of a renovated mill in the Berkshires. I've watched buildings come down that were never built right, and I've learned that the failure is never where people think it is. It's not the crack you can see. That's the load nobody bothered to calculate. The thing that was always going to give, given enough weight and enough time. That night I figured out exactly where my own family had failed, and I figured out who'd been adding the weight. Let me back up, because if I just tell you about the toast, you'll think I'm a bitter old man, and maybe by the end you'll think that anyway, but at least you'll have the whole load diagram. Her name is Hadley, my granddaughter, my only one. Her mother, my daughter, passed when Hadley was 9, a thing I still can't say in a normal voice, so I'll just put it down on paper here and move past it. A drunk driver on Route 7, 2 days after Christmas. My daughter's husband, Hadley's father, lasted about 18 months after that, before he decided fatherhood wasn't for him and moved to Phoenix with a woman he met online. He sends a card sometimes, not even on her birthday, just whenever he remembers she exists. So it was me. From the time she was 11, it was me and Hadley in that house in Lenox. I learned to braid hair off a video on my phone, sitting on the edge of the tub while she cried because the other girls had French braids and she didn't. I learned which cereals were the right ones and which ones would get her made fun of, which is a thing I didn't know mattered, until she told me in tears that I'd bought the store brand. I went to every parent-teacher conference and sat in those little plastic chairs with my knees up around my ears. I drove her to soccer at 6 in the morning. I paid for the braces, and then the retainers she lost, and then the second retainer. I paid for the SAT tutor and the college applications, and then I paid for college. University of Connecticut, 4 years, no loans, because I'd promised my daughter at the funeral, talking to a box in the ground like a crazy person, that her girl would never have to worry about money the way we had when she was small. I'm not telling you this so you'll think I'm a saint. I'm telling you because of what came later. Because there's a difference between a man who keeps a ledger and a man who never expected to need one. Hadley met Trevor Pemberton her senior year. He was getting an MBA 2 years older, the kind of polish that I should have read better than I did. Firm handshake. Looked you in the eye. Called me sir in a way that I took for respect and that I now understand was a kind of management. His parents, Roland and Bitsy Pemberton, had money. Old Connecticut money. The country club in Avon, a name on a wing of a hospital. Roland did something in private equity that he never could quite explain to me, which in my experience means it's either very complicated or very simple, in a way you don't want examined. I liked him at first. I want to be honest about that, because it makes me feel like a fool, and I think you should know I was a fool, because it's the only way the rest of this makes sense. Bitsy started in slow. That's the thing I didn't see. She didn't attack. She accumulated. The first time Hadley brought Trevor home for Thanksgiving, Bitsy came too, and she stood in my kitchen, where I taught that girl to make pie crust, and she ran her finger along the counter and said, "Oh, it has so much character." She said it the way you'd say it about an old dog with a limp. Character. I laughed it off. At Christmas, she gave Hadley a strand of pearls that had belonged to her own mother. "Every young woman should have something passed down," she said, and she looked at me when she said it, and I understood I was supposed to feel the absence of whatever I hadn't passed down. I'd given Hadley a car that fall, a good used Honda, reliable, the kind of thing that won't strand a young woman on the side of a highway. But you can't see safety. You can see pearls. Over the next 2 years, I watched my granddaughter get slowly, carefully translated into a Pemberton. New way of talking. New opinions about wine. A laugh I didn't recognize. Lighter. Higher. The laugh of a woman performing comfort she didn't feel. She started calling Bitsy Mom B. She started spending holidays in Avon. She'd come up to Lennox, less and less. And when she did, she had this restlessness, this checking of the phone, this sense that the real life was happening somewhere else, and I was a stop on the way to it. I told myself it was normal. Young people pull away. They come back. My wife used to say that about our daughter, who pulled away at 19 and came back at 26, with a baby and a need for her mother that broke both their hearts in the good way. So I waited. I figured I was paying for a wedding and getting a son out of it, and grandkids down the line, and I figured the distance would close. The wedding planning is where the load really started showing up, if I'd been reading the structure right. I'd told Hadley I'd cover the wedding. I said it the way you say things to a kid whose mother's dead, too big, too fast, before I'd thought about the number. But I meant it, and I'd been putting money aside for years. A Hadley account, I called it. Started the year my wife died. By the time the wedding came around, there was a real amount in there. More than enough. Then Bitsy got involved. Suddenly, at the venue I suggested, a beautiful inn up in Stockbridge, the kind of New England place with a porch and old maples, was a little rustic. Suddenly, we needed the country club in Avon, 300 guests, a band flown in from Nashville, a planner named Quill who charged by the hour and seemed to bill for breathing. Suddenly, there was a champagne tower. A champagne tower. I'm an engineer. I looked at that thing, and the only thing I could think was that the bottom row was load-bearing, and somebody was going to learn that the hard way. The number went from a number I'd planned for to a number that made my chest tight. And every time I tried to talk to Hadley about it, Bitsy was somehow already in the room, and the conversation would slide. Oh, but this is once in a lifetime. Oh, you can't put a price on memories. Of course, if it's a hardship. And she'd let that hang there, if it's a hardship, looking at me, knowing exactly what it would do to a proud man to admit anything was a hardship in front of the girl he raised. I paid for all of it. Every invoice came to me. I want you to understand that. The Pembertons, with their private equity and their hospital wing, paid for nothing. Not the rehearsal dinner, which is traditionally the groom's family. I covered that too, because by then, Hadley would come to me with these requests already half apologizing, and I couldn't stand to see her made small, so I'd just say yes and write the check. $240,000. That's what the wedding cost me, all in. I'm putting the number down because people always want to know the number and because the number isn't even the point, and you'll see why. I started to feel it about a month before the wedding. Not the money. The thing underneath the money. I'd call Hadley and Bitsy would answer her phone. Oh, she's just trying on the veil. Can I take a message? I got moved from a speaking role at the ceremony to a special acknowledgement. Then the special acknowledgement quietly disappeared off the program. When the seating chart came, I was at table 11. Not the family table. Table 11, near the kitchen doors, between a college roommate and an aunt of Trevor's who talked the entire time about her hip. The night before the wedding, at the rehearsal dinner I was paying for, I overheard Bitsy in the hallway by the coat check. She didn't know I was there. She was talking to one of her Avon friends, and she said, well, he's paying, so we can hardly leave him off the list entirely, can we? And the friend laughed, and Bitsy said, he's actually quite sweet, like a, you know, like the help who's been with the family forever. The help, like the help who's been with the family forever. The help, like the help. I stood there in that hallway with my hand on the wall. Old plaster. I could feel the laugh behind it. I remember thinking the wall was older than anybody at that party, and something in me went very calm and very clear. It's a feeling I've only had a few times in my life, all of them right before I had to walk into a building and tell the owner it couldn't be saved. Because here's the thing they didn't know. Here's the load nobody calculated. When my daughter died, she left the house. A modest house, but it sat on 4 acres in Lennox that turned out to be worth a great deal more than the house. I'd put that house and that land into a trust years ago for Hadley. The Pembertons knew about the trust. Bitsy had asked about it directly, more than once, at dinner, with that bright voice. And, of course, Hadley has her grandmother's property, doesn't she? So lovely to have a foundation. They were counting on it. Trevor had a startup he kept talking about. They had plans for that money, plans that included Hadley's name on things, and Pemberton hands on the steering wheel. What they didn't know, what Bitsy never thought to ask, because she assumed a structural engineer from the Berkshires didn't know how money worked, was the language of the trust. I'd written it myself, with a lawyer in Pittsfield, the year after my wife died. The trust didn't invest in Hadley until she turned 35. Until then, I was the sole trustee with full discretion. Full discretion. 3 words a lot of people sign and never read. And there was a clause. A clause my lawyer had argued against, because it was unusual, because it was sentimental, because it wasn't strictly necessary. I'd insisted on it anyway, and I remember why. I remember sitting in his office and saying, I want it to mean something that we're family. I don't want her ever taking it for granted that this just appears. So we wrote in a clause that the trustee, me, could amend the beneficiary's terms in the event of estrangement or repudiation of the family relationship. Repudiation of the family relationship. I'd written those words 11 years ago, thinking they would never matter. They were insurance against a feeling, not a thing I expected to need. I didn't decide anything that night in the hallway. I want to be clear about that because I've turned it over 100 times since. I didn't lie awake plotting. I went back to the rehearsal dinner. I smiled. I shook Roland Pemberton's hand. I told a man whose name I didn't know that yes, I was very proud indeed. And the next morning I put on the suit I'd bought. Gray, good. The man at the shop in Pittsfield had taken 20 minutes with the cuffs. And I drove to Avon, to the country club, to my granddaughter's wedding, with no plan at all except to love her and be quiet about everything I'd heard. I almost made it. The ceremony was beautiful. I'll give them that. Hadley came down the aisle on the arm of Roland Pemberton. Roland, not me. A thing nobody had told me would happen, a thing I learned by watching it happen from table 11. She'd asked Roland to give her away. The man she'd known for 3 years walked my granddaughter down the aisle while I sat between the roommate and the aunt with the hip, and I held my face the way my wife would have held it, and I thought, all right, the day isn't about me. Hold steady. Then came the reception, and the champagne tower, which did not in fact collapse, and the dinner, and then the toasts. Roland gave one. Bitsy gave one. Bitsy actually cried, talking about how Hadley had filled a hole in their family, how she'd always wanted a daughter, how some children just find their way home to the family they were meant to have. People dabbed their eyes. I sat with my hands in my lap, and then Hadley took the microphone. I think part of me already knew. The way she didn't look toward table 11 once while she scanned the room. The way Bitsy reached over and squeezed her hand first, this little anointing. I want to thank the people who actually raised me, my granddaughter said. My real family. The Pembertons. Because blood doesn't make a family. Love does. And some people only ever showed up with a checkbook. 140 people turned to look at me. I have thought a great deal about what I felt in that second, and the honest answer is nothing. A roaring kind of nothing. Like the half second after you hit your thumb with a hammer and before the pain arrives. I was aware of the white tablecloth. I was aware of the aunt next to me going very still. I was aware that across the room at the family table, Bitsy Pemberton was watching me with an expression I can only describe as satisfied. She wanted to see it land. She'd built this, the whole structure, 2 years of it, and this was the keystone, and she wanted to watch it set. I want to tell you, I stood up and made a speech. I didn't. I'm not that kind of man, and anyway, my daughter's daughter had just told a room full of strangers that I was a checkbook, and there is no speech for that. I stood up, yes. The room got quiet because old men standing up at weddings make people nervous, and I did walk over, but not to the microphone. I walked to the family table, to Hadley, and the closer I got, the more her face changed. Because up close, I think she saw I wasn't angry, and somehow that was worse. And her chin did this thing he used to do when she was small and knew she'd broken something. I leaned down. I put my mouth near her ear, and I said 3 words very quietly, just for her. I release you. That's all. I release you. And I set a folder down on the table next to her plate. I'd had it in the car. I'd brought it for reasons I didn't fully understand. Even then, the way you bring an umbrella on a clear day, because something in your shoulders tells you to. And I straightened up, and I walked out of that country club, past Roland, past Bitsy, past the Champagne Tower, and nobody said a word to stop me because nobody knew yet what had happened, including, I think, me. The folder was a copy of the trust amendment. I'd had it drawn up that very morning before the wedding at my lawyer's home office. I called him at 7 a.m., and he'd met me in his bathrobe, and I'd signed it on his kitchen table with his wife as witness, and I'd told myself I'd never use it, that I was just looking at it, that having it in the car was a way of being angry without doing anything. But a man doesn't drive to his lawyer's house at 7 in the morning to look at something. The amendment invoked the repudiation clause. It removed Hadley as beneficiary and redirected the entire trust, the house, the 4 acres, the value of all of it, to a scholarship fund I'd been quietly running for years out of my firm, for first-generation engineering students at the state schools. Kids like my daughter had almost been kids who didn't have a grandfather with a Hadley account. I didn't do it for revenge. I've sat with that word, revenge, and turned it over, and it isn't right, even if it's the word everyone reaches for. I did it because she told the truth, finally, in front of everyone, and the truth was that she had repudiated the family relationship, and I'd written, 11 years before, that the family relationship was the whole reason any of it existed. She'd dissolved the foundation. You can't keep the house standing on a foundation that's been dissolved. That's not spite. That's physics. Hadley called me at 2 in the morning. I didn't pick up. She called again at 6. I was awake. I'm always awake at 6. 30 years of soccer mornings will do that to you. And I sat at my own kitchen table, the one with so much character, and I let it ring, and then I picked up. She was crying. Real crying. Not the performance. Grandpa, what is this? What did you do? I said, I love you, Hadley. I always will. But I heard you. I didn't mean it was a toast. It's just what people say. You meant it, I said, and that's all right. You're allowed to mean it, but I'm allowed to hear it. She got angry then, the way you do when crying isn't working, and she said the Pembertons were right about me, that this proved it, that I'd always been about money. Look at what I was doing, taking away her inheritance over a toast, and I let her say it. I'd built a career letting buildings tell me the truth about themselves. I could let a 23-year-old tell me hers. When she ran out, I said, it was never your inheritance, sweetheart. It was your mother's house. I was going to give it to you because you were my family. That's the only reason it was ever yours. The money was never the thing. The money was just the shape the thing took. You're the one who decided it was a checkbook. I'm just agreeing with you. And then I said the part I'd figured out at 4 in the morning, the part that's true. The part that cost me to say, the Pembertons didn't take you. You went. I watched you go for 2 years, and I kept writing checks because I thought if I just held the door open, you'd come back through it. But you weren't lost. You chose. And a man can forgive being left. What he can't do is keep paying the people who left him to keep leaving. She hung up on me. Bitsy called the next day, all honey. Surely we can be reasonable. Surely you don't want to punish Hadley for one emotional moment. Think of how this looks. I let her talk. When she was done, I said the only thing I had for her, which was, Mrs. Pemberton, you told your friend I was like the help. I just wanted you to know the help heard you, and the help owned the building. And I hung up, and I have to tell you, I'm not proud of how good that felt, but it felt good. That was 14 months ago. The scholarship fund sent 11 kids to engineering school this year off the proceeds of the land sale. I got a letter from one of them, a girl from Hollyoak whose father drives a delivery truck, and she wrote it by hand. And she said nobody in her family had ever gone to college. And I keep that letter in the same drawer where I keep the photo of my wife and my daughter at the lake, the 3 of us. My daughter may be 4 years old in a yellow swimsuit, and I look at all of it together sometimes and I think, this is the family relationship. This is what the clause was protecting. Not a house. This. Hadley and I don't speak. I won't pretend that doesn't sit on my chest at night, because it does, every single night, and anybody who tells you that doing the right thing feels clean has never had to do a hard one. It doesn't feel clean. It feels like standing in the rubble of a building you condemned, knowing you were right, Knowing right doesn't bring it back. But last month I got a letter from Hadley. No return address, postmarked Hartford, 3 sentences. She wrote that she'd left Trevor. She wrote that she finally understood what I'd meant about the difference between being taken and choosing to go. And she wrote, at the bottom, in handwriting I taught her at a kitchen table 20 years ago, I'm sorry. I see it now. I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know I see it. I haven't written back yet. I will. I'm taking my time because I'm an old man and I've learned you don't rush a repair. You let the structure settle first, you find out what's actually still standing before you decide what to rebuild. But I'll tell you the truth, the way I've tried to tell you the whole truth here, even the parts that don't make me look good. When I read those 3 sentences, I sat down at the kitchen table with all that character in it, and for the first time in 14 months, I cried. Not because I'd won. I didn't win. Nobody wins these. I cried because the foundation was still there, cracked, settled, load shifted, but there. And you can build on that. A man who knows buildings knows you can almost always build on that. You just have to be willing to start from the truth of what's left. For 14 months, I sat with the question of whether I'd done a cruel thing or a true thing, and I've come to believe they aren't always different. When Hadley stood up at that country club and called me a checkbook, she wasn't lying. That's what made it land the way it did. She had stopped seeing the man and started seeing the bank account, and the terrible part is that I'd helped her get there, one yes at a time, every check I wrote to keep the peace, every hardship I refused to admit. Cause and effect. I taught her, without meaning to, that love arrived as money, and then I was wounded when she finally said the lesson back to me out loud. What saved me wasn't anger. Anger would have had me overturning the champagne tower and shouting in front of 140 people, and that man would have deserved every bit of the satisfaction Bitsy was waiting to see on my face. What saved me was sitting still long enough to think clearly, to remember the trust I'd written 11 years before, to understand the difference between punishing a child and simply agreeing with the truth she'd told. Knowing the structure of a thing, really knowing it, the way I knew buildings, is what lets you act without flailing. I didn't need to win the room. I needed to be right about the foundation, and then I needed the steadiness to walk out quietly and let the truth carry its own weight. And it took something I didn't know I still had to follow through. It would have been so much easier to write one more check, to call Bitsy's bluff with a smile, to keep the door propped open for a granddaughter who'd already walked out of it, holding firm when your own heart is begging you to fold. That's the hardest engineering there is. I cried in my truck in that parking lot. I cried again at 6 in the morning on the phone, but I didn't bend, because bending would have meant teaching the Hollyoak girl who wrote me that handwritten letter that some people's dreams matter and some people's don't. Here is what I'd want anyone watching to carry out of this. Be the kind of person whose love can't be mistaken for a checkbook, but if it ever is, have the clarity to see exactly where the failure started and have the spine to fix it, even when fixing it breaks your heart. Hadley left Trevor. She wrote me 3 sentences. The foundation is still there, cracked but standing, and I'm going to write back, and we're going to rebuild slow. Not because she earned it back, and not because I forgave easy, because I finally understood that the family relationship was never the house or the trust or the $240,000. It was the willingness to tell each other the truth and stay anyway. That's the only thing worth passing down.